Greetings, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, coming at you here today on, I'm recording on the 6th of July, 2020, but you'll actually be seeing this on the 7th of July, 2020. Nonetheless, shalom, friends. Happy again to be here with you guys. I know it's been a while since we've actually had an episode of the Watchdog up. That is obviously my fault, as it typically is, so I want to go ahead and apologize for that, but we're going to go ahead and just jump right into what we got here for today. There are a few things I do want to briefly say as far as announcements, right? Those are things that we haven't really had in a very long time. So first things first, I do actually have a debate this week on Wednesday. You may not actually end up seeing it published until Thursday. It kind of depends on how long it takes to do any sort of editing, which realistically speaking, all my editing is the addition of my intro and outro, as well as the fact that since I'm typically screen recording, just getting all of that screen recording there collected. So sometimes for whatever reason that takes 25 minutes, and sometimes for whatever reason that takes 12 hours. So I have to figure that out. Nonetheless, either this Wednesday or Thursday, you'll see a video. It'll be a debate between me and Libertarian presidential candidate, at least former, Adam Kokesh. Right, Adam Kokesh, as you guys may know, we actually had an interview with last year, April 10th, 2019, discussing some of the differences between minarchism and anarchism, and whether or not it was actually a good or reasonable idea to completely dissolve the United States federal government. Well, of course, his libertarian political campaign did not actually end up going the way he planned. Joe Jorgensen is actually the Libertarian presidential nominee at this point. But nonetheless, he did actually raise some very interesting questions and posit some interesting ideas over the course of his presidential run. So I'm going to be debating him on the question, does the Constitution help or hurt human liberty? I'll be taking the position that it helps, right? I'll be taking the position that it is a good thing indeed for human liberty. And yeah, we'll have that, like I said, up. It'll be recorded at about 2 p.m. Mountain Time on Wednesday. But like I said, whether or not it'll be actually up on Wednesday, we'll of course see. But nonetheless, that'll be pretty exciting. Also, the William Branham debate. I know that this is more of an issue for those of you guys who are interested in my apologetics work. But nonetheless, it will finally be happening. I'll have to announce that on an apologetics because I'm sure a lot more people actually care who watch an apologetics than who watch Watchdogs. But nonetheless, it is finally going to happen September 12th, 2020. Rod Bergen versus Jesse Smith on the question, was William Branham a prophet of God? I will be moderating. There will be a co-moderator. I believe his name is Ted Krause. Nonetheless, we will finally be getting that up, and I am ecstatic for that. So I want to go ahead and thank everybody who has been patiently waiting for that debate to happen. It is, of course, something I consider to be quite a big deal. So yeah, I'm just excited to finally have that up and running. And also, excuse me, we have crossed over 100 subscribers, right? And we've also crossed over the 200 like milestone on our Facebook page. So not gigantic milestones, of course, but we want to thank the Most High God for what he has blessed us with. Certainly very pleased with you guys for sticking around here and for supporting me, right? For liking my videos, commenting on my videos, watching the videos, right? Everything that you guys do here, certainly do appreciate that a lot. We've also had a lot of, recent debates on modern day debate. I did a debate on transgenderism, did a debate on Confederate statues, and did a debate on systemic racism, and all of those were within the last month on that channel. So I'm very pleased to be having these opportunities also, right? And really a lot of things going very well is the point. Lastly, but not leastly, you guys, of course, know that we... Oh, wow, excuse me again. You guys, of course, know that we are on Twitter, Instagram, Gab, BitChute, so on and so forth, right? Have our Patreon, all of those sorts of things. Well, we've actually gone on to another social media platform at this time, and that is Parler. Parler, of course, has been relatively popular amongst conservatives and general independent thinkers who have been trying to leave the Twitter sphere. I have not left Twitter. That being said, I am now on both Parler and Gab. So I'm on two different Twitter competitors, right? And hopefully we'll actually see either Twitter shaping up, realizing that it's going to be losing significant amounts of users, or we'll just see Parler and Gab be the improved version of Twitter, one of the two. So far, it does appear that Parler has a better chance simply because Gab had what ends up happening in these situations a lot of times when you found a new social media or video streaming website is all of the undesirables get there very quick. And as a result, a lot of the people who do actually generate large amounts of views and therefore add revenue and therefore obviously make your business sustainable, they kind of want to stay away because they don't want to be associated with the website, which is associated with these undesirables, people like neo-Nazis, white supremacists, so on and so forth. And that unfortunately happened to Gab, as well as numerous other social media competitors and video streaming competitors as well. And it's kind of a lame thing because you have to, on one end, if you want to actually be somebody who respects free speech, you have to let people like David Duke and so on and so forth on your platform. And yet at the same time, if those people become the popular people on your platform before anybody like a Shane Dawson or a David Wood or a Mark Dice or somebody who's considered to be, whether it's political, religious, comedic, whatever, right, a little bit more respectable, it just causes people to be turned away. They're just not interested in being associated with the website whose most popular user is David Duke. You know what I mean? And that's not Gab's fault. That's not BitChute's fault. That's not Real.Video's fault, right? It is unfortunately kind of the nature of forcing quote-unquote undesirables off of your platform, and then also, forcing people to kind of, what's the word there? Succumb, I guess, to your standards of speech. It means that those people who do want to actually go find a free speech platform now actually have to rely on the places where those undesirables went. The best way, in my opinion, to get around that is somehow, some way, you got to get, like, day one, high-profile YouTube content creators onto your platform, or in the case of Twitter, right, blue check marks, or so on and so forth, right? Just high-profile people on your platform to actually, come onto this new platform first. So that way, sure, there's 100,000 people listening to David Duke, but it's drowned out by the fact that 10 million people are listening to MatPat or whatever, right? And so in effect, we just don't care. And that's in my opinion, the best way to go about those things. But we'll see if that ever ends up happening. Parler seems to be the situation where that may end up happening, at least in regards to Twitter, simply because Parler not only has gotten a lot of really, really mainstream conservative voices, right? Of course, Gab and BitChute and so on and so forth had a lot of conservative voices who were not necessarily mainstream, like Alex Jones and so on, Gavin McInnes, right? So on and so forth. But actually, mainstream voices seem to be showing up on Parler, and I think that's a very good thing because it could allow Parler to, by the time it gets these undesirables on its platform, already have drowned them out with voices who are considered to be a lot more reasonable. The biggest thing, in my opinion, that is going to help Parler in this situation, even though it's not what I would consider necessarily to be ideal, because I think entertainment, since it has such a larger market, is the best, is the best way to go about it. In other words, having somebody like Shane Dawson, PewDiePie, Kanye West, whatever, on your platform is significantly more impactful than a politician, a Christian apologist, a political leader, right? But if any one of those three categories were to posit their best champion as far as, what could bring a lot of reasonable users to a certain website, I think Parler found the best one, which is President Donald Trump. And so, that could definitely end up helping Parler to be a successful competitor, a successful alternative to Twitter, and kind of succeed where Gab seems to have unfortunately failed at this point. Although, of course, we'll see what happens. Gab still has plenty of time. That is basically what's going to be our pre-article discussion for today, is talking about these social media platforms and also, a little bit of the what do you call those? Announcements. Sorry. Significantly tired. It was up till 5 a.m. in the morning. Namely because I don't know if you guys have ever had this situation, but you kind of don't get very good sleep, so you take a nap and then you wake up from your nap and it's basically midnight, and so you're going to be awake for the next 4 or 5 hours because you just got done with a very solid 4 or 5 hour nap, and now everything's just kind of thrown out of whack. That's basically what I'm dealing with right now, so please do forgive. And let's just go ahead and jump right into some of the articles we have to talk about here today, because there's a lot of interesting stuff, if I do say so myself, and I do. So here we have, and a lot of these articles are relatively old. By relatively old, I mean about a week. Part of the reason for that is, of course, because of the fact that I have not been on for a little bit of time. So we will have more episodes up this week to talk about a little bit more, current news as far as things that are happening right now. But just because things happened a week ago does not mean that they are not important. Just because things were pointed out a week ago does not mean that they're not important. So I definitely still want to go over some of these articles with you guys. And I have a sneaking suspicion that even though all of these are found on other websites, as far as the things that people actually watch/listen to on the radio or television or YouTube or what have you, I have a sneaking suspicion most of this stuff is not being talked about. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Here we have John Rappaport from InfoWars. Huge COVID case counting deception at the CDC. And of course, this is something that we have kept up with since the beginning of the COVID outbreak, right? We've been telling you guys constantly about, and by the way, we have made clear, and when I say we, by the way, I just so you know, there's, other people who are a member of this team. We have made very clear to you guys, right, that we are not going to rely on ourselves and our own intuition and our own lack of trust in the experts, right? But that rather we are actually going to put forward the data and what experts who are not necessarily in line with the status quo have to say. And as a result, there's been quite a bit of evidence, I think, that we've been able to provide to you guys that the whole coronavirus thing is a hoax. Not to say that COVID-19 doesn't exist, not to say that people have not legitimately died from COVID-19, but what it is to say is that the panic levels that we are currently reaching about COVID-19, as well as the numbers themselves, definitely seem to be fudged, exaggerated, inflated, what have you. So, we've gone over that numerous times in previous episodes with things like the 25% inflation of the death rate, or the death numbers, rather, cold death numbers. The death rate itself would be one thing, but of just the actual numbers itself, we've, of course, seen evidence of anywhere from 28 to 70 times more Americans actually contracting this virus than was previously thought, which, of course, would indicate that the death rate is somewhere down to the levels of like 0.9%, right? And, of course, even though we haven't actually talked about this yet on the Watchdog, what we have seen since the last time we were on the Watchdog is a complete and total disregard for social distancing guidelines, for lockdown guidelines, for mask requirements, so long as you are actually doing something that is considered to be woke. For example, gay pride parades or BLM protests or protesting the President of the United States or Chop Chazistan, whatever it happens to be called, so on and so forth, right? So there's been an awful lot of evidence to suggest that this whole COVID thing, even though the virus itself does exist and certainly has killed people, that the level at which we are panicking and the amount of deaths and the amount of fear that is surrounding this particular virus is definitely worthy of the title of hoax, right? And I think we've seen that in numerous instances all throughout this year. And in fact, there's even many things that we have talked about here on the Watchdog that I have not addressed here in this little soliloquy I'm going on now. Well, here we have even more evidence, as if you needed more evidence, but apparently some people do, because the vast majority of Americans, it seems, are actually still convinced that this is a problem for some reason. And of course, it's a problem in the sense that we don't want anybody dying. Every single individual death is a tragedy, but in the sense that people have been making it out to be, of course, I think we have basically proven at this point it is not that much of a threat. It's roughly the same as a bad flu year. And for comparison, I give the 81,000 who were killed by flu in 2018. Now, I know people saying, oh, but isn't there like 135,000? Well, again, I have to say, and we've done news reports on this in previous episodes, there is substantial evidence to suggest a bare minimum of a 25% inflation in those death numbers, which would bring that down to less than 100,000. I believe it would be about 93,000, if I'm doing my math correctly. Somebody can check me on that. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump right into this article, right? The agency, and by which I mean the CDC, mixes flu and other disease diagnoses into the coronavirus category. And again, this is John Rappaport from InfoWars. The article was written June 30th of 2020. For this piece, we have to enter the official world of the insane, where everyone is quite sure a new coronavirus was discovered in China and the worthless diagnostic test means something and the case numbers are real and meaningful. Once we execute all those absurd maneuvers, we will land square in the middle of yet another scandal, this time at our favorite U.S. agency for scandals, the CDC. And of course, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, just because basically every single one of the alphabet boys is pretty proficient in scandals. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and continue on with the article. The Atlantic, May 21st, has the story headline, "How could the CDC make this mistake?" I'll give you the key quotes and then comment on the stark inference, the Atlantic somehow failed to grasp. And again, just so you guys know, I don't know if you're keeping up here, but this is where we are now. Just obviously saw the previous paragraph we were reading, so yeah, just want to make sure that you guys know exactly where we're at. We've learned that the CDC is, quote, we've learned that the CDC is making at best a debilitating mistake, combining test results to diagnose current coronavirus infections with test results that measure whether someone has ever had the virus, right? Which, of course, that's a pretty big deal, because if somebody had the virus, say, 3 months ago, right, and you're counting them as somebody who currently has the virus, that is absolutely going to inflate the numbers as far as those who we believe currently have the virus, and therefore those who we believe could potentially overwhelm the medical system, right? So that's quite a big mistake to be making right there. It's not just like, it's a kind of a, small mistake, little white lie, we'll be able to move on and everything's great. No, this is actually a huge problem that could lead to drastic overreactions in order to, quote unquote, not overwhelm the medical system, right? Excuse me. Returning to the quote, the agency confirmed to The Atlantic on Wednesday that it is mixing the results of viral or PCR antibody tests, even though the two tests, even though the two tests reveal different information and are used for different reasons, end quote. Another quote, several states, including Pennsylvania, the site of one of the country's largest outbreaks, as well as Texas, Georgia, and Vermont, are blending the data in the same way. Virginia likewise mixed viral and antibody test results until last week, but it reversed course, and the governor apologized for the practice after it was covered by the Richmond Times-Dispatch and The Atlantic. By the way, I just got to point out, how disgusting is it that we're getting an apology from, a former KKK member himself, baby massacre extraordinaire, Ralph Northam, but not from some of these governors who we adore so much, like Kemp from Georgia and Abbott from Texas. I just wanted to point that out because a lot of people are seemingly worshiping at the altar of the Republican Party. And not only is that completely ridiculous because it's just a political ideology, but the Republicans do not follow the conservative or constitutionalist political ideology the way you think they do. That's just a fact. I mean, that is a undeniable fact at this point. Maine similarly separated its data on Wednesday. Vermont authorities claimed they didn't even know that they were doing this, end quote. Quote, you've got to be kidding me, end quote. Ashish Jha, I hope I said that right. I'm sorry if I didn't. The K.T. Lee professor of global health at Harvard and the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute told us when we described what the CDC was doing. Another quote, how could the CDC make this mistake? This is a mess, end quote. Quote, the CDC stopped publishing anything resembling a complete database of daily COVID test results on February the 29th. When it resumed publishing test data last week, which was the middle of May, that kind of ended at a weird spot. I guess they're just trying to point out that it did resume in the middle of May, but nonetheless, we end the quote there. First of all, the CDC's basic mission is publishing disease statistics on an ongoing basis. Reporting partial data flies in the face of what they're supposed to be all about. But the big deal, of course, is combining from two different tests, the PCR and the antibody, and placing them in one lump. I've read the article forwards, backwards, and sideways. This, of course, is John Rappaport speaking. And it appears the experts believe only PCR viral tests should be used to count the number of COVID cases. So here's a takeaway I find nowhere in the article. Combining the two tests will vastly inflate the number of cases. And, of course, that is the case. Of course, that is the case. Because another thing, too, you have to remember here, right, is there is going to be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who may actually have the antibodies because they carried this disease and were kind of asymptomatic, right? And then their antibodies eventually were built up as a result of carrying this disease, but never actually got sick, right? Never actually had any symptoms that would tip them off as to, being somebody who had a cold or COVID or what have you, right? And those, usually at least, are not people who we would be counting, because they're not people who we would ever have the opportunity to count, because they're not people who were showing up in the hospital, being diagnosed, so on and so forth, right? So that's just something else I wanted to point out here, that not necessarily everybody who even has the antibodies has the virus in the way that you're thinking about it. They have the virus technically, right, as far as just the actual facts. They definitely do carry the virus, right? But as far as what you, the laity, might be thinking of when you think carry the virus, you're probably thinking something along the lines of being sick. Millions of these people who carried the virus would not actually have ever gotten sick. They'd be completely asymptomatic the entire time, which is another reason why mixing these two pieces of data together is problematic. Where did I leave off here? I'm not talking about categories like rate of infection or percentage. I'm talking about plain number of cases, which of course does end up impacting rate of infection or percentage. Some PCR tests will indicate COVID and some antibody tests will indicate COVID, and adding them together will pump up the number of cases. You know, that big number they flash on TV screens 100 times a day. Quote, coronavirus cases jumped up again yesterday, and the grand total in the U.S. is now, ... end quote, that number. The number media and government and related con artists deploy to scare the people and justify lockdowns and use to stop reopening the economy. The brass band circus with flying acrobats and elephant and clown number. I like that comparison there, or analogy, whatever, metaphor, whatever you would call that. Therefore, I'm not characterizing what the CDC is doing as a mistake. They've managed to create the illusion that absolute case numbers are higher than they should be. Somehow, these mistakes always seem to result in worse news and not better news. The errors are always on the high side rather than the low side. Case in point, the computer prediction of COVID deaths in the UK and US made by the abject failure Neil Ferguson, who, by the way, also was an abject failure in regards to his predictions of the H1N1 virus, otherwise known as swine flu, of bird flu, of SARS, of MERS, of mad cow disease, of Ebola. I don't have any idea why anybody takes this man even remotely seriously anymore. He is a clown and a con artist, right? And in fact, I almost wonder, given a lot of the things he said outside of his official capacity as a doctor, I even wonder if it's failure, like if he's completely incompetent, or if it's actually deliberate as a means to control people, and it just so happens that COVID is the first time that it actually worked. At any rate, though, case in point, the computer prediction of COVID deaths in the UK and US made by the abject failure Neil Ferguson, whose track record going back to 2001 has been one horrendous lunatic exaggeration after another. Now, of course, that's what I was just referring to. His 2020 projections of 500,000 COVID deaths in the UK and 2 million in the US were directly used to justify the lockdowns in many countries. Ladies and gentlemen, there is not 500,000 COVID deaths in the entire world. In the entire world, okay? That is absolute nonsense. And yet, this is what we have been using to justify lockdowns of every country on the entire planet, with the exception of a few brave souls. This is the logic we have been using to completely annihilate human liberty in this country, to start the creation of a sci-fi dystopian police state, to eliminate the economy. We're now still currently at 11.1% unemployment rate, which is huge, by the way. It is 1.1% higher than we ever had in 2008, 2006, that whole era of crisis, right? And by the way, yes, it has shrunk from the 21.1% it got to. And praise the Lord for that, because that is an absolutely amazing thing to happen, right? To shrink by over 10% that quickly. But we're still at 11.1%, right? And by the way, we've been at 11.1% now since March. It's July. That's 4 months. It takes 6 months to be considered a recession. So I just want to point that out, right? And not just that, right? The reason we are making it illegal to sing in churches. I'll get more to that, hopefully, in an episode of Unapologetics coming up this weekend. And the reason why we are banning people from voting, and so on and so forth. The reason we are banning sports, right? All of this was based off of projections that did not even accurately, if you take the projections right for the UK, they would not even accurately describe the death toll in the entire world, the whole planet. There is over 7 billion more people on this planet than there is in the United Kingdom, and he could not even get that number correct. If you take the United Kingdom numbers and make that the blanket number for the entire world, it still would be incorrect, right? But this is the man, as well as that moron Fauci, who has just an abysmal record, right? These are the men and women, of course, because there's other people out there, who we are trusting to move us forward in this quote-unquote COVID crisis that is basically impacting nobody, at least literally or directly speaking, right? Obviously, it's impacting everybody in the sense that rather we're all losing our liberties and being kicked out of our jobs and so on and so forth. But as far as actually getting the disease, I barely know anybody who knows anybody who's had the disease. As far as people who have actually had the disease, I don't know a single person. I know one person who may or may not have possibly been exposed to the disease. You know what I mean? And of course, that's just an anecdote. But I think you get the point, right? This is not something that is impacting a lot of us, right? Because I'm not the only person who has said this. There is hundreds of thousands of people all over the Twitter spheres, Facebook sphere, and so on, who are saying the exact same thing. I literally don't know anybody who knows anybody who has come into contact with this disease, right? And I think that's a big deal, right? Eventually, a collection of anecdotes becomes a body of data. The CDC back in 2009 stopped reporting the number of swine flu cases in the U.S. while still claiming that the number was in the tens of thousands. I have written a great deal about the scandal, which was exposed by then CBS investigative reporter Cheryl Atkinson. The CDC stopped counting cases because the overwhelming percentage of tissue samples from patients was coming back from labs, with no sign of swine flu or any other kind of flu. And yet, in a later retrospective analysis, the CDC claimed that at the height of the epidemic, there were 22 million cases of swine flu in the U.S., which, of course, is absurd. We definitely would have had more of an impact on the nation if there was 22 million active cases at the same time, right? I mean, that's just something that is not avoidable. You have a deadly disease, even something like the flu, right? When you have 22 million people who have the flu at the exact same time in the same country, it becomes obvious. And the CDC and everybody else very quickly realizes that that is the case, right? But of course, apparently we didn't realize it was the case with this particular disease until, 5 years later? But anyways, we continue. Going all the way back to 2003 in SARS, the CDC and other public health agencies around the world hyped the danger to the sky. The final official death count globally, when the dust cleared, 800. Because, of course, they are perpetually awful at absolutely everything that they do over there in the CDC. There is a tradition of lying on the high side, blowing up figures in order to create the illusion of destruction. CDC, mistake. The agency is currently incompetent. And incompetent is being nice, by the way. I would say maliciously and deliberately deceitful. But let's go with incompetent. That's at least the nice way to put it. But that's just the beginning of the story. The only time they say there is no danger is when they are lying about the effects of vaccines. My headline for the Atlantic article would read, so how many COVID cases should we subtract to get the actual number? And the first paragraph would go this way, quote, just when governors are trying to reopen their economies, a gigantic case-counting deception at the CDC is taking the wind out of their sails. The millions of Americans suffering financial devastation could be pushed back into a hole. Who is screaming to high heaven about that on the nightly news? No one. Why not? End quote. And then, of course, there is the link to the Atlantic article. I'll have, of course, the link to this article in the description below, which means you'll be able to get to the... As a matter of fact, I'll just put the link to the Atlantic article in the description below as well. I mean, how many different instances of outright deception and agenda-riddled lies do you need to be exposed to before you finally come to terms with the fact that the COVID-19 crisis is a hoax? A manufactured, baloney, completely hogwash hoax, right? And like I said, that does not mean the disease itself doesn't exist. It does not mean that there has not been people who have died from the disease. What it means is they are taking something that does legitimately exist, that has legitimately killed people, and are inflating it in such a way that it is becoming hoax-like. It is reaching hoax levels of inflation, right? At this point, we have now seen that the amount of cases could be 28 to 70 times greater than what people originally thought but that people had no idea about it because the disease is actually not big of a problem, which of course drops the death rate down to 0.9%. We've now seen that the death numbers can be reasonably assumed to be inflated by at least 25%. We've seen that the government is paying people for not only COVID cases, but paying them 3 times that number for COVID deaths. Not kidding. We've reported on that in previous Watchdogs. You can watch them. I'll even put those in the link in the description as well, right? We've seen the habitual incompetence of these people in their predictions, right? Both this year and in the past. Now we've even seen that the gross number of cases that are active, at least, is being exaggerated by the CDC. We've seen, like I said earlier, the fact that they're saying, oh, well, if you're going and protesting for Pride or protesting for Black Lives Matter, well, then that doesn't actually spread anything. But if you want to open your barbershop or attend a Donald Trump rally, that's obviously going to kill every grandma on the entire planet. And so on and so forth. I mean, how many different instances of outright fabrication, lies, bullpucky do you have to be exposed to before you finally concede the fact that your experts are habitually garbage at their job, if not maliciously deceiving you, right? And by the way, let me just point out, appeal to experts in a blind fashion is literally a recognized logical fallacy. Philosophy 101, they would teach you about appeal to authority. So I just want to point that out next time everybody says, I trust the experts. I don't trust this guy on blah, 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 blah. No, trust the evidence. Trust the evidence. You don't trust the experts, you trust the evidence, right? Why do I trust the surgeon if I were to go and get surgery on, for a hernia or a heart surgery or what have you? Because there's evidence that what he is going to do and what he has done in the past, considering the fact that he's probably done this before, works, right? There's evidence. I'm not trusting him because he's an expert. I'm trusting the evidence, right? And so on and so forth. So I just want to consistently and always stress this to you guys, because this problem is not going away anytime soon. Honestly, the next 1 to 5 years may be completely the news cycle for 1 to 5 years may be completely consumed by COVID at this point. I don't know that for a fact. I'm not going to make any bold predictions saying that's for sure the case, but I would not be surprised if 2025 rolled around and we were still talking about this nonsense. Nonetheless, there's other things we need to talk about. We've already managed to waste 32 entire minutes of this program. So,
to slow the spread of COVID-19, the CDC recommends wearing a mask whenever you leave the house.
Especially if you're in a public setting where you're unable to social distance.
2020, no pun intended. Know that this did indeed happen. The Prime Minister appeared to indicate Israel would miss a July 1st target date to begin the process. This was written before the fact. We are now reporting this after the fact and can confirm for you that indeed Israel did miss that deadline and is going to go ahead and wait on the West Bank annexation plan. Now, for those of you who don't know, which I highly doubt is anybody who actually watches this program consistently, because I mention it basically every single show, I am a firm believer in Zionism. Not just Zionism, but in nationalism, indeed, for all people groups. For those of you who may wonder, doesn't that include the Palestinians? Well, yes and no. The Palestinians are not actually a cultural people group that is unique from any other people group. They are just your basic run-of-the-mill Levantine Arabs. They have 4 different countries they could go to. By order of the Balfour Declaration, Jordan is actually their nation. Jordan, by the way, is like over 4 times the size of Israel. But even if they didn't want to go to Jordan, their culture fits in perfectly with Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. So, I just want to point that out. And a simple look at their flags, by the way, would prove that. Because you notice the Palestinian flag is actually a pan-Arab flag, right? Why is it a pan-Arab flag? Well, because they're not actually a unique culture, the Palestinians, right? They are simply an offshoot of the Levantine Arab culture. And as a result, when I say nationalism for all nations, for them, what I'm talking about in particular is going back to one of those countries, preferably Jordan, because the Balfour Declaration, I think, is pretty clear in giving the land of Israel to the Jews and giving the land of Jordan to the so-called Palestinians. And I believe that if we were if we were legitimately interested in making peace in the region, that would be the best way to go about it, even if initially it would be something that might be violently opposed. In the long term, I think it would be more peaceful, right? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Tuesday that discussions with the U.S. on his plan to annex occupied West Bank territory would continue in the coming days, indicating he would miss a July 1st target date for beginning the controversial process. I made the comment shortly after wrapping up talks with White House envoy Avi Berkowitz and the U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. The sides have been holding talks for several months on finalizing a map spelling out which areas of the West Bank will be annexed by Israel. It is my personal belief, and I don't think this will happen, but it is my personal belief that the entire so-called West Bank region, which is accurately described by the names Judea and Samaria, should be annexed by Israel. In fact, if there is any area in the land of Israel that the Jews actually have a legitimate claim to, it is more so Judea and Samaria than it is what we now in the modern day call Israel proper. It is Judea and Samaria where David was born, where his capital is set up, right? Which of course I speak of Jerusalem. That's where Shechem is, which is obviously where you had all of and Hebron, right? And those are the places where the patriarchs lived and died and were buried, right? You look at Judea and Samaria on a map, both of their capitals and their holy places and etc. would be in what we now call the West Bank. In fact, the entirety of their countries, literally all of it, would be in what we now call in the modern day the West Bank. It is not until actually the Hasmonean dynasty that what we now call Israel proper would be reconquered by the Hebrews. And it was way before that, during the period of the United Monarchy under David, Saul, and Solomon, that was actually the case before in the past, right? So if there's any claim the Hebrews have to the land of Israel, it is not what we refer to in the modern day as Israel proper, but it is Judea and Samaria. So I don't understand why they don't annex the entire thing and just boot those who have a problem with it to the curb, honestly. But then again, like I said, I am a nationalist for all nation, a pretty firm Kahanist. So, spoke about the question of sovereignty. Quote, I spoke about this question of sovereignty, which we were working on these days and we will continue to work on in the coming days, end quote, Netanyahu said. Netanyahu has been eager to begin annexing West Bank territory in line with President Donald Trump's Mideast plan. The plan, unveiled in January, envisions turning over some 30% of the territory under permanent Israeli control while giving the Palestinians autonomy in the remaining land. Both of which, of course, I have been perfectly clear, I think don't go far enough. I don't think that the Palestinians should have any autonomy in anything that we consider to be the land of Israel, which includes Judea and Samaria. And I also think that Israel should be annexing that entire region. I also, of course, fear for the internationalization of Jerusalem and who that might be given to, i.e. potentially the United Nations, the World Council of Churches, a UN for Religions, or possibly even the Vatican. But the plan to redraw the Mideast map has come under fierce international criticism. The UN Secretary General, the European Union, and key Arab countries have all said Israeli annexation would violate international law and undermine the goal of establishing a viable independent Palestinian state along Israel. The Palestinians, who also seek all of the West Bank as part of a future state, have rejected Trump's plan. And of course, this is why I've been saying that there's just no need to be concerned with what it is that they have to say, because they're not going to accept any of the plans you have in the first place. You might as well just take what is rightfully yours, right, and tell these people to deal with it. Like I said, you can force Jordan's hand, right? Jordan is supposed to be the land for the Palestinians. So, I mean, force their hand. Don't be forcing Israel's hand. Israel captured the West Bank from Jordan in the 1967 Mideast War. The international community considers the territory to be occupied, even though, literally, who cares? I mean, right? The international community, the you and what army is what I gotta say, right? And for Israel's more than 120 settlements to be illegal. Trump has taken a far more conciliatory line with his Republican and Democratic predecessors. Netanyahu, a close ally of Trump, has said Israel must take advantage of what he calls a historic opportunity and is eager to move forward before the November presidential election, which, of course, we will see if that happens. Netanyahu says his goal of annexing all the settlements, as well as the strategic Jordan Valley, is necessary to protect Israeli security He has also defended it in religious terms, saying the territories are part of the biblical land of Israel. And I do want to point out that even with this annexation, the narrowest that Israel is still only like 10 miles. I mean, it's not at all a viable solution to the problem that they are currently facing, which is just that at its narrowest point, with the Palestinians having what the West Bank, Israel becomes something that you cut in half like that, right? I mean, instantaneously. Besides international opposition, Netanyahu has encountered some resistance from his governing partner, Defense Minister Benny Gantz. The coalition agreement for their new government, which took office in May, gives Netanyahu the authority to present an annexation proposal after Wednesday. But U.S. officials have said they do not want to move forward with a plan unless the two leaders are in agreement. Gantz, who also holds the title of alternate prime minister, which he'll get in about a year and a half, roughly, said Monday that the July 1st target date was not sacred. He also said that annexation will wait while the government grapples with Israel's health and economic crisis caused by the coronavirus, which, to be honest, I don't necessarily disagree with. It might not be the best idea to do something that could potentially start a war or insurrection or embargoes on your country or what have you, right, while you have a economic crisis or a health crisis. That being said, it also could be used by opponents of annexation to just push this off indefinitely until they eventually get somebody else who is more in line with their beliefs in the prime minister position, which, of course, like I said, in about a year and a half if you start counting from May, will be Benny Gantz, and we can actually see whether or not that will happen. I think this is vital, honestly, in international politics. I think a lot of people don't care to pay attention to what goes on in the Middle East anymore because they kind of just assume it's a dumpster fire. And it is a dumpster fire. Don't get me wrong. It absolutely, positively is a dumpster fire. At the same time, though, there's really absolutely nothing that can be done about that. So we kind of just do have to accept that. And regardless of how ridiculous and dumpster fiery we can describe the Middle East as being, the fact of the matter is the Middle East is the most vital region in the entire world. We like to think, that here in the United States that we're the center of the world, and I'm sure a lot of other countries like to think it about themselves also. The people in the Levant can literally make that claim. Like, they literally are the center of human civilization. That is, Islam is obsessed with it, Judaism is obsessed with it, Christianity and all of its different offshoots are obsessed with it. Even the secular humanist many times is obsessed with it. We know that if the West Bank is annexed, it could potentially cause not only a massive regional conflict, but we could even see the beginnings of a world war, and I certainly hope that is not the case, right? Because realistically speaking, it would be kind of lame if you would be stuck in the position of either doing something that is just wrong, i.e. giving the Palestinian people a state in the West Bank, so-called at least, and potentially starting a worldwide conflict. I mean, that's a problematic position to be in, I think, right? It could potentially cause, obviously, religious wars, especially if they decide to do anything in regards to the Dome of the Rock, which I have personally made clear. I think that all Israelis should be willing to accept that a temple cannot be built, nor can the Dome of the Rock be removed, unless we have clear and obvious proof that the Messiah is back. Of course, in their personal belief system, that would be he's here for the first time. But nonetheless, I just think that should be a general rule of thumb. But you get the point, right? There's a lot of things that could go wrong, and therefore a lot of things that could impact the entire planet in this particular region. It quite literally is the center of the world. And if we see this annexation plan go to fruition, if we see Trump's peace plan come to fruition, if we see any sort of internationalizing, right, of the city of Jerusalem or the UN, WCC, UN for Religions, WARP, etc., getting involved in this region, Catholic Church, EU, etc., right, we could see global impact, the likes of which we have not seen at least for a very long time. And I think we need to know that. We need to be very aware of what it is that we stand to lose by not having a proper policy as it pertains to the Middle East. But nonetheless, let's continue. We have more news. we don't talk very much about the things we used to talk about, and so I wanted to talk about those things again. Namely, globalism, and specifically globalism as it pertains to religions, right? Of course, why do we call ourselves the Watchdog? Because we are watching the Pope Francis, as well as the WCC, the WARP, and all these other international religious bodies, right? And it's been a while since we've talked about that because of all the riots, the election, coronavirus, etc. So I want to definitely go ahead and look into this a little bit more today. So here we have from the Jewish Telegraph Agency, World Council of Churches wants EU sanctions on Israel if it annexes West Bank lands, which of course directly ties into the article we were just reading. This article, though, is over a month old at this point. Or no, I guess June 11th, not quite a month old. Almost a month old, just under a month old at this point, but it does still provide us with some absolutely vital information, in my opinion, as it pertains to the international community and their dealings, especially from a religious perspective, with the nation of Israel and the so-called nation of Palestine. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. The World Council of Churches is asking European diplomats to punish Israel with sanctions if it annexes the West Bank lands. The request has triggered a heated debate in Christian circles. The call to punish Israel came last month in a letter to EU foreign ministers from the Geneva headquarters of the Council, an umbrella body established in 1948 that now has 350 member churches with about 500,000 followers among them. The Catholic Church, at least not yet, is not a member, and I added the at least not yet part myself, but of course, well, I say of course, but I guess quite a bit of people who watch this now may not have been watching the Watchdog back in those days, but we reported in the past that the World Council of Churches and Pope Francis are very buddy-buddy. Pope Francis indeed had a mass or communion, if you're in Protestant circles, with the World Council of Churches to celebrate their 70th year anniversary in Geneva. That was 2 years ago, 2018. So the Catholic Church is not a member yet, or at least in name. But nonetheless, we continue. If Israel annexes the land, the letter said, quote, the EU must surely suspend the EU-Israel Association Agreement, end quote, a reference to a 1995 contract that promotes trade between the bloc and the Jewish state. In addition, the EU should apply sanctions on Israel, quote, at least commensurate with those adopted by the EU in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea, end quote. The EU has blacklisted hundreds of Russian individuals and firms over alleged involvement in the Crimean annexation from 2014, subjecting them to entry bans and freezing of EU properties. And of course, you know, this is something that, at least in my opinion, is entirely abiblical for the World Council of Churches to be doing. It's definitely not a Christian thing to be doing. People say, well, how can a Christian support the oppression of a certain people group? The thing is the Palestinian people aren't oppressed. In fact, they don't even exist, right? There's no such thing as Palestinians. Palestine, as I said before, is not a unique culture unto itself. It is simply an offshoot of the Levantine Arab culture that has 4 different nations, at least that I can name off the top of my head. I may be missing some, but Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, right? So, quite frankly, not only are they not being oppressed in the sense that the people who are being described by the moniker Palestinian are not actually being oppressed, but also, even if the Arab people in Israel were being oppressed, we still couldn't say the Palestinian people are being oppressed because there's no such thing as Palestinian people, right? Palestinian people are not real. There are Israeli Arabs and there are Levantine Arabs who need to get out, right? That is what exists in that area. And we need to be clear on our terms here. This is why I always like to refer to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria, because it's not the West Bank, okay? It's not the West Bank. It is Judea and Samaria. That is the historical name of the region. It is what the region is, and it is land that belongs to the Jewish people, regardless of what any World Council of Churches, self-appointed, has to say about it. The EU has blacklisted hundreds of Russian individuals and firms. I already read that. Quote, the unilateral annexation of yet more territory that remains to Palestinians cannot lead to justice or to peace, but only to greater injustice, end quote, the church body wrote. In recent years, the council has been accused of pursuing an anti-Israel agenda, a claim rejected by its leaders, which Obviously they did. That's like going after the KKK and saying, hey, you guys are racist, and the KKK being like, what? No, we're not. That's just totally not true, guy. Yeah, of course you would say that, right? But nonetheless, it's been pretty obvious that they had an anti-Israel agenda. I mean, basically every opportunity they have, they're attacking Bibi Netanyahu, they're attacking Israel itself. By the way, it's never over some of the things Israel legitimately does wrong, like persecution of Messianic and Karaite Jews, or its potential racism in not actually accepting Ethiopian Jews to the fullest extent of the law. But it's always about things that pertain to Palestinians and so on and so forth, right? Which I find hysterical, because there are legitimate criticisms to be levied at Israel, absolutely. It just so happens that these aren't them. In 2019, it emerged that the council, had gathered information for years on the Israeli army's actions in the land that the council and international community regards as. Hang on, let me restart that. In 2019, it emerged that the council had gathered information for years on the Israeli army's action in land that the council and international community regards as occupied, with activists masquerading as tourists. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced plans to apply Israeli civilian law in the Jordan Valley and some Israeli settlements in the West Bank as early as July 1st, which of course we now know with hindsight did not happen. Advocates of the plan say it ensures security control over Israel's longest border and cements the existence of settlement blocks as part of Israel without precluding the option for a future Palestinian state in the remaining territory. The council's statement drew sharp criticism from Christians for Israel, a Netherlands-based international network of pro-Zionist Christians from 27 countries and hundreds of thousands of congregants. The group said in a statement that churches should not meddle in Middle East politics and that the council did so in a one-sided manner. And in fact, I would argue that the churches should not meddle in politics, period, right? It is one thing for individual Christians to meddle in politics, which of course I firmly support, right? For example, I think makes 100% makes sense for a Christian to think I cannot support somebody who supports abortion, and therefore, because of my Christian values, I will vote for someone else. It is a completely different thing, in my opinion, to start actually mixing the structure that governs the church with the structure that governs the nation. I think that is when people say separation of church and state, that is literally what they mean, is separation of the two governing bodies so that one does not, severely impact the other. I would also point out, just for the record, that all the anti-Zionists out there who say, oh, they're just, Christians are just, head over heels in love with Israel, and Israel wants to take over the entire world, and the whole international community is down with them, and what have you. You could not possibly be more wrong. I mean, I honestly wonder if you guys do go out of your way to ignore literally all of the news in existence. Because the Israeli nation is constantly attacked by literally every international body I can think of. By the Catholic Church, by the World Council of Churches, by the World Alliance of Religions for Peace, by the European Union, by the North American Union, by the United Nations, right? The World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, that the United Nations group that's like focused on cultural sites and stuff like that. I don't remember exactly what they're called. I think it's like UNICEF or something. OPEC, right? I mean, literally every international body that you can conceive of. I think the only friends of Israel in the entire world are America, although that comes with an asterisk, the Philippines, and that honestly might be it. I think there's some countries in South America, if I'm not mistaken, who are friendly with the nation of Israel at this point. But, like, I mean, man, how easy it is to disprove this notion that the Zionists are somehow, in everybody's pockets. I mean, the people go after the Zionists more than they go after any other group on the planet, except maybe Christians and conservatives here in the United States of America, although that's debatable and neither here nor there. At any rate, in the Netherlands, the letter caused a split within the country's largest church body, the Council of Churches of the Netherlands. That's because that organization had forwarded to Dutch Foreign Minister Stef Blok the letter calling for sanctions, adding it was the position of all its constituent member churches. Well, I mean, once again, like I said, right, people complain about the misuse of separation of church and state. I agree that the misuse of separation of church and state is something that absolutely needs to be addressed. But this is directly what is being referred to when people say we need separation of church and state. Church bodies should not be calling upon, especially these interfaith bodies, right? Should not be calling upon government officials to do anything at behest of the church. Like I said, individual Christians can vote in a certain way because they believe that their ideology, that their beliefs, that their sincerely held convictions are going to lead them to vote in a certain way. And if that leads you to believe, hey, if you think to yourself, I am a Christian, and because of my Christian values, I cannot support Zionism in Israel, I disagree with you wholeheartedly, but that is your right. And you even have a right to say that. You have a right to say that and to use that as a method of getting people on your side to vote against certain politicians and certain political agendas, right? That is 100% your right. To get your church body involved, literally, the governing structure of your church involved in the governing structure and governing matters of the nation itself, that is a direct violation of separation of church and state. And I know that this is another country. It's not the United States of America. But separation of church and state is something that I think absolutely everybody, at least if it's properly understood, should affirm, because it has been made beyond clear by history, by not only history, but even the modern day. If you look at people like Iran and Saudi Arabia, right, that mixing church and state is terrible. It is terrible. And it's not just church and state. It happens to be any ideology that you enforce at the point of a gun, even if that ideology is true. But infinitely more so with religion, because people think that it has some sort of a metaphysical, spiritual significance, which, of course, I'm even one of those people. I believe in Christianity, right? But that doesn't change the fact that I recognize how dangerous it is for a bunch of people who believe in Christianity to mix the governing structure that dictates their Christianity and their doctrine and their theology and so on and so forth with the governing structure that dictates the actual laws that they follow. It's a pretty good way to get people persecuted, including fellow believers, by the way, right? If we just take the Saudi Arabian example again, Muslims who don't agree with their version of Islam are just as persecuted as Christians, Jews, and atheists, right? So it doesn't work out for anybody at all. Anyways, we continue. Prompted hundreds of angry reactions, including threats that were sent to the Council of Churches of the Netherlands. Its chairman, and I'm 100% positive I'm going to say this incorrectly, but Gert van Dartel wrote in a letter. Hang on, let me restart that. This prompted hundreds of angry reactions, including threats that were sent to the Council of Churches of the Netherlands. Its chairman, Gert van Dartel, wrote in a letter to Christians for Israel. Additionally, two church bodies that belong to the Council of Churches of the Netherlands publicly distanced themselves from the umbrella group's letter to the bloc and complained that the decision to include them as co-signers was made without consulting them and against their position, which, of course, is the literal definition of the word dishonesty. But definitely trust these guys. The churches that protested were the United Pentecostal and Evangelical Churches and the Covenant of Free Evangelical Congregations in the Netherlands, which have tens of thousands of followers and about 200 congregations between them. Dutch Chief Rabbi Benjamin Jacobs, in a column on the CIP website, linked the letter on sanctions to centuries of Christian hostility to Jews. And don't get me wrong, I sincerely loathe the fact that every time something has to come up, Jews always have to point out things that were done thousands of years ago. Which, of course, I know I'm a little bit exaggeratory and dismissive in that, but I do it on purpose, just so you know. But that being said, I mean, it's not like this is entirely wrong, right? There is certainly a history, especially in Europe, of anti-Jewish bias amongst Christians, especially governing bodies of churches, which is part of the reason that I think that this is made clear in the Bible, that I don't think you should have governing bodies per se. It's one thing to have a pastor, obviously, which of course you need, but having a bishop who then goes to meet with this big council of bishops and the head bishop and all that other kind of stuff, I mean, I think that that's just nonsense. But nonetheless, neither here nor there. That's a subject for an unapologetics. Quote, considering the history in which churches continuously instructed Jews on what they can and cannot do, it would behoove those same churches to adopt caution and humility on Israel, end quote, he wrote last week. Quote, it's a democracy. It can, may, and must make its own decisions and solve its own problems, end quote. It's a very dangerous thing to be saying, Rabbi Jacobs. I applaud you and agree, but might end up getting yourself arrested. You never know with the way the world's going these days. kind of commented everything I wanted to comment while we were reading that, but, you know, just to kind of wrap up, put a nice little bow on top, as ABL, Anthony Brian Logan, would say. You just see the international community more and more, both from a religious and political perspective, coming out against the nation of Israel and against the plans that the nation of Israel has, even though these plans are plans that are legitimate by any logic anybody uses ever. And I'm sorry to be so dismissive of your logic if you disagree with me, but your logic is not so. The fact of the matter is, this land belongs to the Jewish people. That is just it. And the Arabs have other land which they stole, by the way, okay? Which I only point out for this reason, right? We are not saying, hey, you need to give back literally all the land that you stole thousands of years ago. Not even all the land that historically belonged to the Jewish people, but just a small sliver of land that is the size of New Jersey, right? You still have all of Iraq, which you conquered, all of Syria, which you conquered, numerous instances in Iran, formerly known as Persia, which you conquered, Jordan, which you conquered, Lebanon, which you conquered, Libya, which you conquered, Sudan, which you conquered, Egypt, which you conquered. I could go on if you'd like me to. Right? The fact of the matter is, Arabs are from Arabia. Mind-blowing concept. Everybody's mind just exploded all at the same time, right? Arabia. That's where you come from. And yet, we're not up here saying, right, oh, you need to leave absolutely everywhere that you have conquered in the past. We are simply saying that one of the groups that was conquered deserves to have a little bit of land. A little bit of land. Not even all of their historical land. A little bit of land. If we wanted to give them all of the historical land, give me everything from the Euphrates to the Nile. But we're not. And by the way, lest anybody start questioning, well, what about the Native Americans? That's a straw man, or not a straw man, sorry, a tu quoque, what about you kind of thing, right? It's whataboutism. However, perfectly down to take one of the 50 states and give it to the Native Americans. I think that's beyond reasonable. In fact, there is a couple of states with lower than 1 million people that would make perfect, what would the word there be? Candidates, right, for a sort of a Native American Zionism. So just to preempt that objection, I am absolutely 100% down with maybe Alaska, Montana, the Dakotas, right? Absolutely. I mean, that's the least we could do after the Native American genocides. But nonetheless, right, we see the entire international community going out of its way to attack Israel, to attack the Jewish people, and to say you do not actually have the right to have this land that is indeed your historical land, even though it was conquered and taken from you. And of course, even though the Bible is quite clear that, those who bless you being Israel, God will bless also. But of course, who has any time for scripture in the Christian religion, am I right? Nonetheless, 1 minute for peace with Pope Francis from the Vatican News. Men and women of goodwill across the world are invited to stop for 1 minute of peace on Monday. Which Monday in particular, you may be asking yourself. This was Monday, June the 8th. I'm trying to find the exact timestamp and writer for the article here, so that way I can give credit where credit is due. Of course, I didn't write this myself. But nonetheless, this was on June the 8th. And, of course, it shows more so the globalization of the world, the internationalization of religions, the mixing of church bodies and state bodies, particularly as it pertains to global politics. And it's just, it's something that I think we're seeing basically always now. It's undeniable. People can say this is a conspiracy theory all they like, but it is a constant thing. The Pope, the World Council of Churches, etc., they are always consistent in their demand, really, that peace be made between all religions and that global bodies be established to ensure that this peace is made between all religions, which, of course, is something that literally just 5 years ago we would have said is not only a crazy conspiracy theory, but is completely evil and we would never allow it to happen. But, of course, now in the modern day, we're talking about potentially chipping people, so I think everybody's moral conscience is basically just completely evaporated. Nonetheless, the International Forum of Catholic Action, or IFCA, is calling on believers across the globe to stop, bow their heads, and pray for peace. Everyone, according to his or her own tradition, at 1 p.m. Rome time and on Monday 8th in June. Sorry, I just got confused because the Europeans don't do it the same. We would say June 8th, Monday, June 8th, rather, not Monday 8th of June. So just confused me a little bit there, sorry. But nonetheless, yeah. So notice that. Bow their heads and pray for peace, everyone according to his or her own tradition. What do we have here? Some enigmatic global religion scheme in the name of peace, in the name of freedom and equality and all this other kind of nonsense, right? Oh, camera wasn't on. Not that really matters, I guess. You guys are looking at the article, but nonetheless, got that fixed. Returning, sorry. So we see here that he is going on with this, new international religions sort of a peace speech because he wants everybody to get together. And of course, when they get together, who are they getting together under the behest of? It's under the behest of the Vatican, Pope Francis, who considers himself to be in place of the living God. But whatever, we can just totally accept all of this as nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, move along, etc. IFCA has chosen the date to commemorate the unprecedented meeting of prayer for peace called for by Pope Francis on the 8th of June, 2014, in which the presidents of Israel and the Palestinian Authority met in the Vatican to pray together for peace in the Holy Land. If I was trying to frame the Vatican for trying to have some sort of a globalized movement to endanger everybody's freedom and take control, I wouldn't be, if this is the kind of stuff I would make up, is basically what I'm saying. I'm still kind of having stuff in my throat because of that little coughing fit I got into, but nonetheless, this is the kind of stuff that I would make up to try and frame them. And yet, this is what they're saying themselves blatantly on the Vatican's official government-run news website, right? So, lest anybody think that this is conspiratorial, that this is just some crazy tinfoil hat theory that crazy right-wingers and evangelical Christians on the far fringes of the internet suggest, right? In fact, that is not the case. In fact, as a matter of indisputable fact, this is what the Vatican themselves, the World Council of Churches themselves, the United Nations themselves, is saying. Launching today's initiative, the organization said it called for the first A Minute for Peace event in 2014 in preparation for that unprecedented meeting of prayer promoted by the Pope. That initiative was supported by local Catholic action organizations, by the World Union of Catholic Women's Organization, and many other entities. Quote, we urged a prayer in the form of witness, short, simple for everyone. The response was significant in the various countries. In particular, almost 10,000 people gathered on Facebook in a short time, end quote. An IFCA statement said. The underlying theme of the June 8th, 2020 Minute of Prayer for Peace, is from Pope Francis's message for this year's World Day of Peace. Quote, peace is a great and precious value, the object of our hope, and the aspiration of the entire human family. Let me get a little bit theological with you guys for a second. As a Christian, that is abhorrent, evil, disgusting, and I cannot stand it. You mean to tell me that you are the leader of a body which proclaims faith in the Most High God, in His Son's sacrifice, and you actually will affirm with a straight face that peace is not only a great and precious value, which I agree with, but the object of our hope and aspiration of the entire human family? Blasphemy. Blasphemy. You should be immediate. If the Catholic Church genuinely was reverential towards our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they would immediately remove you from your position for this nonsense, for this absolute blasphemy. The object of our hope is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, nothing else, nothing further, nothing less, right? That is it. And I want to be as strict as I possibly can with this, because this is a organization which claims that they are Christian, which claims that they are worshipers of the Most High God and of the sacrifice of His Son. And I'm sorry, but if that is the case, there is no way you could possibly affirm anything even remotely close to the statement, peace is the object of our hope and the aspiration of the entire human family. Bull, bologna, hogwash, blasphemy, let me make clear. The object of our hope as believers in Christ is Christ. That should be more clear to you than anything that could possibly be made clear to you as a Christian, as a devout follower of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And the object of the aspiration of the entire human family honestly should be the same. Although, to be fair, the aspirations of men are not things that we should necessarily be basing doctrine or theology or ideology or anything else on, right? Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? So I just want to make those things clear. I'm going to leave and get back to my secular talking about politics self here for the Watchdog. But as a Christian, I just want to say that the statement, peace is the object of our hope, in my opinion, could not possibly be more offensive. Acknowledging IFCA explained that it is an invitation to pray by oneself for or with other people in safety in our homes or our places of work or study, and encourage participants to engage others and promote the event on social and other media. Acknowledging the difficult situation we are living in because of the pandemic, the statement quotes from the Pope's reflection during the extraordinary moment of prayer, which took place on March 27th. Quote, "How many people every day are exercising patience and offering hope, taking care to sow not panic, but a shared responsibility? How many fathers, mothers, grandparents, and teachers are showing our children in small everyday gestures how to face up to and navigate a crisis by adjusting their routines, lifting their gaze, and fostering prayer? How many are praying, offering, and interceding for the good of all? Prayer and quiet service, these are our victorious weapons. The Lord asks us, and in the midst of our tempest, invites us to reawaken and put into practice that solidarity and hope capable of giving strength, support, and meaning to these hours when everything seems to be flourishing. Let me make something perfectly clear to anybody who may be confused. There is absolutely nowhere in Scripture which demands solidarity with the world or with the different religions of the world. Okay? Let me also make clear from a secular perspective, the uniting of human beings is not the kumbaya you think it is. It is absolutely not the kumbaya you think it is. The uniting of human beings means the uniting of human beings under one man or governing body. That one man or governing body is now in control of every human being on the planet. Their agenda becomes the agenda not only for people in Japan, but for people in Venezuela, and for people in China, and for people in the United Kingdom, and for people in Texas, and so on and so forth. And that is nonsense. And on top of that, it is outright evil. You cannot possibly make the Muslim of Saudi Arabia happy, as well as the Christian of Alabama, as well as the atheist in Japan, as well as somebody who believes in Marxism, who might be from Germany or whatever, right? You just don't make all of those people happy, right? You have to persecute some at the behest of others. That is just simply the way it will work out. Especially if the person or body who unites the world does so under the guise of religion and divine authority. Right? That person will have all power in the world given to him by the people, and those people will definitely stand idly by as whatever groups he decides he does not like and does not want the world to be associated with, the human race to be associated with, get persecuted to the nth extent. It is an absolute guarantee of any international governance. The IFCA was established by the Catholic Action Movements of Argentina, Spain, Austria, Malta, Mexico, and Italy. By the way, fun fact, Argentina happens to be where Pope Francis is from. Following the 1987 Synod of Bishops at the vocation and mission of the lay faithful in the Church and in the world, and the ensuing publications of Pope John Paul II's post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Christopher, I'm probably going to say this wrong just so you guys know, Christofidelis Laicii, or Laicii. The organization stemmed from the need to create a structure that would enable Catholic action associations and movements to meet, exchange ideas and experiences, and show solidarity. In 1995, the Pontifical Council of the Laity issued a decree recognizing the International Forum of Catholic Action as an international organization of pontifical right. So, directly endorsed by the Pope himself. And I mean, as we get closer and closer to a more chaotic world, closer and closer to what I would describe as the end times, I think we also get closer and closer to an international governing body of religious leaders that will probably be headed either behind the scenes or blatantly in front of everybody by the Vatican, and indeed as a result by the Pope himself. It may be Francis, it may be Francis's successor, it may be a successor 10 popes down the road, but I have a very firm conviction that these guys, by which I mean the governing body of the Catholic Church, not every Catholic, right, are very, very determined to actually make sure, to ensure that this nation and indeed this world are subjugated to their religious ideologies in the name of quote-unquote peace, and probably in the name of fighting climate change and so on and so forth as well. Brief things to discuss before we get off. Man, an hour and 16 minutes. I am not good at this whole making sure I only go an hour thing. Assange has a new indictment against him. I'm waiting for the article here to load for you guys, so I know you see just the blank screen at the moment, but the United States has indeed levied a new indictment against Julian Assange. Julian Assange, of course, is the international hero who has decided to make it his life's goal to expose the corruption of international Western governments, and of course many other governments as well, but everybody only pays attention to the corruption of Western governments, right? Assange has pointed out things such as the Hillary email leaks, such as when there was actually people slaughtering Iraqis indiscriminately, and that was of course revealed by Bradley, now Chelsea Manning, to Julian Assange. Man, it was just working, and now it does this whole thing again. Assange was also responsible for revealing to us that different climate change groups were actually altering the data purposefully to make it seem like climate change was worse than it actually was. And of course, if you remove those errors, it doesn't appear there's any climate change at all. And so on and so forth, right? Assange has gone out of his way to make sure that people are informed about what is going on in the world. Well, he has another indictment coming out against him. This, of course, was Monday, June 29th, as you can see here on the article. I'm not going to read through this whole thing just because we're already over time, so I'll put it in the link in the description below. But you guys do need to know about it. Just briefly, Assange is wanted by U.S. authorities to stand trial for 18 offenses, including conspiring to hack government computers and espionage. Last year, the U.S. began extradition proceedings after he was dragged from London's Ecuadorian embassy, where he had been holed up for almost 7 years. The U.S. Department of Justice issued a second superseding indictment last week, which it said contained no new charges, but broadened the scope of the conspiracy and included accusations of recruiting hackers. Now, of course, Julian Assange is not a United States citizen, and that is the logic a lot of people are using to blame him for things like espionage and stuff like that. Obviously, the United States is supposed to, in theory, have a warm respect for whistleblowers and things of that nature, but of course, we know that that's not actually the case, and we see that more and more as time goes on. Like I said, I will put the link in the description below. Another thing the Department of Justice, headed by our lovely Attorney General Bill Barr, is doing is Cliven Bundy will be going back to court. You heard that correctly. Cliven Bundy armed standoff case going back to court. I was actually disappointed in how long it took me to get this article. You can see here, May 29, 2020. I did not actually read this until the 4th. But nonetheless, it's been 2 years since Cliven Bundy left the federal courthouse in downtown Las Vegas a free man. His arm around his wife, Carol Bundy, the Nevada rancher, was defiant. Quote, "We're not done with this," end quote. Bundy told reporters in January 2018, quote, "If the federal government comes after us again, we will definitely tell them the truth," end quote. And on Friday, the Justice Department, by the way, Trump's Justice Department, headed by Trump's personal pick, Bill Barr, just want to point that out, conservatives. On Friday, the Justice Department will try to come after the Bundys again when federal prosecutors will appeal for a retrial over a 2014 armed standoff between Bundy, his militia, and federal agents who had come to round up the rancher's cows that were illegally grazing on federal lands. The government's case against Cliven Bundy, his sons Ammon and Ryan, and a Montana militiaman named Ryan Payne collapsed after a judge declared a mistrial in December 2017. Bundy and his men were accused of conspiracy against federal agents and other charges for their role in the tense standoff, which later became a symbol over the fight against federal control of public lands. Quote, "If there's no successful prosecution, it's going to encourage a lot of anarchists like the Bundys to take actions that are not only a threat to themselves, but threats to the public at large," said Pat Shea, who served as the BLM, by which we mean Bureau of Land Management, not Black Lives Matter, during the Clinton administration. Now, let's just make perfectly clear what this dog is saying, okay? What this absolute waste of flesh, Pat Shea, is saying, right? What he's saying here, or she, I guess I'm not 100% sure if this is a male or a female, is that, first off, he is lying and claiming that the Bundys are anarchists. They are not anarchists. All three of them, Clive and Ammon and Ryan, are strict constitutionalists. There is a huge, vast difference, and if you don't know that difference, perhaps you're too stupid to be in politics, you absolute disgusting waste of flesh. I hope I've made clear how much I loathe this person, and absolutely anybody, by the way, who supports these actions. You're not an American if you support these actions, and I count you as my enemy. I just want to make that clear. Then he points out, he says, that this will encourage other people to threaten the public at large, even though every time we actually have anybody who's on the center or left, quote unquote, going after the United States, we see nothing. We see nothing. Riots by Black Lives Matter doesn't matter. Chazistan being established in Seattle taken over by Antifa doesn't matter. Going out and shooting people in Dayton and trying to bomb somebody down in Texas under the guise of saving quote-unquote illegal immigrants who were in quote-unquote concentration camps doesn't matter. None of that matters. The Proud Boys defending themselves. The Bundys defending themselves. The Boog Boys. Oh my goodness, right? No, those guys are a problem. Go to hell, you waste of flesh, you pathetic piece of bull crap. I cannot stand any of you, and I look forward to the day when you are standing in front of God for your sins, because this stuff is horrible, abhorrent, disgusting garbage. It is subhuman to be going after people in this way, and on the flip side, letting people who agree with you ideologically do whatever it is that they want, including but not limited to rape and murder, you filth. I hope I've made clear how much I hate, would like to see perish these people, okay? Because I'm serious, there is no way. Our founding fathers were shooting people over a 2.5% tax on tea, okay? And yet somehow we want to make the claim that the Bundys are terrorists. Go to hell. Go to hell, you waste of flesh. I don't have anything else to say, so that's all the commentary I have to make on this. Obviously, I'll put the article in the link in the description below. But nonetheless, if you guys like my ranting soliloquies here, please do like and share. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your dislikes if you want to go ahead and do that. This is the United States of America. Express your opinion, even if it does cause me to be incredibly angry and hate you as a person. Which, of course, disliking me is not something that would cause that. Going after people for, defending their own property while also defending people who murder and rape in the name of their political ideology, that'll definitely get me to dislike you. But nonetheless, this is the United States of America. You can say that if you like. Thank you, of course, for watching this video. I appreciate it. Please do like, share, subscribe if you like our content. We do have this as well as our Christian apologetics programs on the weekends. And, of course, there are links to all of our different social media accounts down below if you want to check that out. I won't list them all because I'm honestly just very frustrated right now and maybe even being a little bit too rough. I don't know. Perhaps I shouldn't be so angry and hateful. But it makes me angry, right? That's all I got to say. It makes me very angry. Nonetheless, thank you guys for watching. Shalom. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Not much else to say. Except, of course, even in the face of Armageddon, do not compromise.